Among all the members of the Beatles, John Lennon often had the reputation of being the most blunt about music, especially when the cameras weren't rolling. While he embraced the freedom to experiment during the band's early years, there were certain musical directions that didn't always sit comfortably with him. One example was when Paul McCartney would bring in what Lennon jokingly called his granny songs, charming but old-fashioned melodies inspired by the British music hall tradition. Lennon admired McCartney's extraordinary songwriting ability, yet his own musical instincts leaned towards something far less polished, something raw, louder, and closer to the rebellious spirit of rock and roll. For Lennon, the best music carried a certain rough edge. It had to feel alive, almost as if it had been pulled straight from a smoky club stage rather than carefully refined for polite audiences. Songs with that kind of grit could instantly transport him back to his teenage years in Liverpool, when he was just another restless kid dreaming of one day sounding like the heroes blasting through the radio speakers. Growing up in Liverpool during the 1950s meant witnessing the explosive arrival of rock and roll. To teenagers like Lennon, the music felt revolutionary. It was louder, wilder, and far more rebellious than anything their parents had grown up with. In a working-class city where opportunities seemed limited, the idea that a group of local teenagers could conquer the world with guitars seemed almost impossible. Yet Lennon and his bandmates dared to believe it. After endless performances in clubs across Liverpool and grueling residencies in Hamburg, the group gradually transformed from a scrappy young band into a musical force unlike anything the world had seen. A major turning point came with the arrival of their manager, Brian Epstein. Epstein helped refine the band's image, replacing their rough stage presentation with the sharp suits and professionalism that would soon define them. More importantly, he secured the recording opportunities that would introduce their music to a global audience. Still, beyond the polished image and growing fame, the real engine behind the band's success was always the remarkable songwriting partnership between Lennon and McCartney. The collaboration between Lennon and McCartney would eventually become one of the most celebrated creative partnerships in modern music. Even during periods when their personal relationship grew strained, their musical chemistry remained extraordinary. During sessions that would later shape the album Let It Be, originally conceived under the working title Get Back, the two could still spark ideas off one another with remarkable ease. One would play a melody, the other would instantly hear a lyric, and together they would sculpt songs that felt larger than anything either could have written alone. Of course, not every early composition was flawless, but even when a song didn't quite land perfectly, it often hinted at the brilliance that was about to follow. That promise soon became undeniable with early hits like From Me to You and She Loves You. Those records helped ignite the phenomenon later known as Beatlemania, and proved that Lennon and McCartney possessed a rare ability to capture the spirit of an entire generation. Still, fans could often sense which Beatle had taken the lead on a particular song. McCartney occasionally faced criticism for favoring sentimental ballads and nostalgic melodies. Yet that label ignored just how versatile he truly was. The same songwriter who could deliver tender love songs was also capable of unleashing ferocious rock energy. Tracks like Helter Skelter exploded with chaotic intensity, while songs such as Gotta Get You Into My Life pulsed with soulful power. McCartney loved rock and roll just as much as Lennon did, though he often approached it with a more melodic and polished sensibility. Lennon, by contrast, absorbed rock and roll in a deeply emotional way. The music didn't simply influence his songwriting, it shaped the way he saw the world. By the time he released the stark and deeply personal album John Lennon, Plastic Ono Band, he had moved far beyond the days of merely imitating his idols like Chuck Berry. Yet those early influences never truly faded. They remained embedded in the DNA of his musical identity. Even in the later stages of his career, Lennon spoke warmly about the records that had first sparked his imagination. While working on his final studio album, Double Fantasy, he frequently reflected on the artists who had shaped his youth. One of the most important figures was Elvis Presley, whose voice and charisma had electrified Lennon when he was still a teenager discovering rock and roll for the first time. Lennon once admitted that certain songs still had the power to send him straight back to those early days of discovery. Records like Bebop-A-Lula could put him in what he described as musical heaven, allowing him to relive the excitement he felt when rock and roll first exploded into his life. Even hearing Presley sing "I Want You, I Need You, I Love You" could trigger vivid memories of the moment that music first captured his imagination. By the time Lennon released the single Just Like Starting Over, that nostalgia had become an intentional part of his artistic voice. The song was crafted to echo the sound and spirit of the 1950s rock and roll records that had once inspired him to pick up a guitar in the first place. In many ways, it felt like a full-circle moment, Lennon reconnecting with the music that had started everything. Tragically, that final chapter of Lennon's life and career turned out to be heartbreakingly short. Yet even after years of artistic evolution, experimentation, and occasional distance from his early influences, rock and roll remained deeply woven into his identity. It had shaped his youth, fueled his ambition, and guided him toward becoming one of the most influential musicians in history. In the end, Lennon seemed at peace with that legacy. He explored countless musical paths throughout his life, but the heartbeat of rock and roll was always at the center. It was the sound that first changed his world, and he remained one of its most passionate believers until the very end.